All right, here we go. Starting a bit late today with the RotoPros pre-lock show. Different reasoning than yesterday. Yesterday was kind of an easier slate to figure out who to use, although didn't really work out particularly well, but the choices made more sense on the surface. There weren't as many. This slate, I've pushed back the analysis just kind of to try to figure out some more information before starting, because this is a very messy slate with a lot of choices that are just kind of similar to one another. There are a lot of directions to go here, and I guess, I don't know, we'll jump right into it with the pitching, which I think is harder to figure out than the offense. So pitching tonight, we had Cole Hamels as the most expensive pitcher on the slate to begin with. He was not someone that I had considered using at all anyway, but now that he is not pitching, I mean, I guess Tyler Skaggs becomes the really obvious play, and he could be highly owned. I think it could be pretty spread out tonight, though, just because there really isn't any one big name pitcher. There isn't any truly obvious play. It's just that Skaggs is expensive. So I do think he'll have a decent amount of ownership, but I also think it'll be pretty spread out tonight. So I don't have too much of a problem with Tyler Skaggs. I think he's a good play. Just because the savings are not too necessary tonight. Like, I think this price tag at $10,400 is higher than it should be, but we have the money to pay up for him. He is the pitcher who I do think will score the most points tonight, although with less confidence than usual for the high-end pitcher. But I think Skaggs is worth rostering because he should fit easily into lineups with the offenses we like. So not too much to say about Skaggs. I think he's a solid pitcher with some strikeout upside. He's facing the Rays, who are a bad offense. They've been kind of average against lefties, but I definitely think they've been overperforming this year. Their lineup does have a lot of righties, but let's see. Who do we have tonight for the Rays? This game is actually pretty late, so we're not going to have their lineup out for a while, but there should be at least 3 lefties in there with Joey Wendell, Brad Miller, Malik Smith, Denard Span. At least 3 of those guys will probably be in the lineup tonight. So not too right-hand heavy for Skaggs. But overall, I think this is just a good spot for him. And price and ownership are small concerns, but I think it's still worth playing him. So after Skaggs, there are a lot of guys to consider. The one pitcher who I'd mentioned yesterday potentially using, but I'm going to rule out, is David Price. The salary isn't so much of an issue. I just don't think Price is very good. And the Orioles offense, with all these righties, especially getting healthier recently, I don't think it's really a good matchup for him. The Orioles haven't had great results over the last year and a half, but they've also had a lot of injuries, and it's rare that there have been times where they're fully healthy, and now is one of those times. So the combination of Price being overrated and the combination of the Orioles offense being underrated, I think it's enough to just kind of fade David Price. And salary isn't irrelevant, although it doesn't matter as much as usual, but it's still not irrelevant. And I think we can get some better choices for cheaper. So the next guy on the list right below David Price is Luke Weaver. And I think Weaver is a solid play tonight. It had kind of sounded last night like Greg and I on the podcast talked about him as maybe like the most obvious pitcher to use, but I'm not sure that's the case. The Phillies strike out a lot against righties, the second most in the league behind the Padres, but they do also have some power. They are a decent offense overall. So I think Weaver's okay. I just don't think he's a great pitcher either. He certainly has been worse than last year. But I think it's kind of just a slightly valuable spot on Weaver where he should cost a bit more. I haven't really changed my tune on that since yesterday, but the other pitchers I've kind of become a little stronger on after Weaver. So I kind of view Weaver similar to Skaggs, where worth using. Not my favorite option, but I think he's a decent play. So my 2 favorite pitchers on the slate are actually Vince Velasquez and where's the other one? Okay, Vince Velasquez and Marco Gonzalez. So Velasquez is at where is he? Hold on one second. All right, get some air in here. All right, Velasquez is at 7,300, and he's facing the Cardinals on the road. The Cardinals' offense is a decent one, but Velasquez is facing almost all righties, something I hadn't really considered when talking about him yesterday. So Dexter Fowler is a switch hitter. Matt Carpenter is a lefty. Everyone else is right-handed. Yadier Molina is still out. It's the National League, so he's facing a pitcher also. And Velasquez doesn't have he's not a great pitcher on the surface by ERA, but his peripherals are really good this year. And he's been much better across the board than he was his velocity. I think Velasquez is a lot more like what he was. He actually had a good season. So just to give you Velasquez's numbers here, he had a 4.12 ERA 2 years ago, which kind of looked unlucky a bit by FIP and XFIP, which were both in the threes. Last year, he was much worse, but this year he's at a 5.05 ERA with peripherals that look a lot more like 2 years ago. He's striking out 11 batters per 9 innings, only walking 3, and he's been a lot better against righties. So I think this is a pretty good matchup for Velasquez. I think he has the most strikeout upside of anyone on the slate. So he probably is my favorite pitcher, although I still don't know if I want to have him in more than, let's say, 50 or 60% of lineups, because I just don't have too much conviction in any one guy. But I think Velasquez is a good play. And then Marco Gonzalez against Detroit, which is just an awful offense. And Gonzalez is kind of similar to Velasquez, where his ERA is a lot worse than the rest of his stats. Gonzalez is facing 9 righties tonight, but he's been really good against righties this year with a FIP and XFIP below 3. Both of them are below 3 against right-handed batters. So Gonzalez has been great against righties. Velasquez has been great against righties. They're both facing basically only righties tonight. Gonzalez especially gets a boost from just facing such a bad offense. I don't know if we have the Tigers lineup yet, but they have just a ton of injuries right now. Jeimer Candelario's out. Obviously, the notable injury is Miguel Cabrera. Even Jacoby Jones, who's been decent for them, got hurt yesterday. He's probably out of the lineup. So it's really just Nick Castellanos and Victor Martinez to worry about, and the rest of the lineup is just really, really bad. So I like Gonzalez for the matchup. And I actually think there's a case to be made that Gonzalez just outscores Skaggs independent of price. So leaving salary on the table is definitely something to look at. 2 highest expected output pitchers actually could be Gonzalez and Velasquez. Like, I think at least they're close to Tyler Skaggs. Not completely, because you still can pay up for some bats, and there are some good hitters that are expensive. It's just kind of tricky here, but I think kind of just mixing it up makes the most sense, because it's really hard to figure out exactly what to do with this slate. The pricing is just all over the board, and we don't have anyone that's expensive that really warrants paying the price tag for it. Like, it would be nice if Chris Sale or Max Scherzer or one of those guys was on this slate and there was an easy pitcher to pay up for, but we just don't have that. So Velasquez and Gonzalez, I think, are the 2 best pricing values, but I don't know if that necessarily means you want to have a ton of them, because you do have the salary left over probably to pay up for Skaggs, and then for Weaver too. So the 5th pitcher I'll throw into the mix here is Jeff Samardzija against the Rockies. He's been awful this year, but the Rockies are just as awful, if not worse, than Samardzija is, especially against righties and especially in the best pitcher's park in baseball in San Francisco. So I think Samardzija is worth having a little of, but I won't really say much more about him than that. And then Chris Archer, I think, is kind of a fade. It's just, I mean, he has been a little bit worse on the road relative to what a pitcher should be for normal home road splits throughout his career. He's definitely cheap, but the Angels offense just doesn't strike out a lot, despite what they did against Justin Verlander yesterday. It's a road game for Archer, and I think there are just better choices. But he's probably worth considering too. I think he's kind of a similar play to Samardzija for, I guess, different reasons. But if I had to pick between those 2 guys, I think Samardzija is the better play, but with almost no conviction. Like, I think that's number 5 and 6, and I'll probably just be targeting different guys other than them. So in terms of ownership, I think it's going to be a pretty even split for me between Gonzalez, Velasquez, and Skaggs is my first 3, with Weaver number 4, and then maybe Archer and Samardzija mixed in. That'll be 5 and 6. All right, moving to offense, because that should do it for pitching. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to say about pitching. So on offense, we've got the Rangers against James Shields, which is obviously a great spot. I still really like the A's against Aaron Sanchez, who actually could be argued is as bad as James Shields. Like, his numbers have just really not been good the last 2 years. He's really only ever been good in his career as a reliever, although he had one pretty good season as a starter, which maybe was just boosted by really good fortune, where he had a 3.13 ERA as a starter. Is that the number? 3.22 ERA, and actually then a 3 ERA as a starter in 2016. So that 3.22 ERA was mostly as a reliever. But Sanchez has never really gotten strikeouts. He averages less than 7 Ks per 9 for his career. He walks over 3.5 batters per 9, and that's boosted by the fact that he's been in the bullpen for a lot of his career. But this year and last year, it's about 6 Ks per 9 and 5 walks per 9. Like, that's about as bad as anyone. And in the last 2 seasons, Sanchez hasn't really limited hard contact the way he did in the past. So I think at this point, we can just call him a well below average starting pitcher, and he's against a really cheap A's offense that has a lot of power and generally does well against ground ball pitchers because they all swing with uppercuts. That was something I talked about more in depth last night, but nothing's really changed here. I definitely like Oakland's offense. Nice pitcher's park in Toronto. The issue here is we don't really need the savings for Texas or for Oakland, but I still think the output is potentially high enough for both teams that it's worth leaving money on the table to use cheaper pitchers with cheaper offense and still stack these two teams. For expensive offenses, though, I think there's one that's going to definitely have the most ownership, but I think there are 2 that are better. So the Red Sox should be the chalky team tonight against Kevin Gausman. The Red Sox have just been really good lately. They always have a lot of ownership. And I think with salary on the table, people are just going to pay up for them just to fit them into lineups. But Kevin Gausman has been much better lately. And the Red Sox offense, while good, I don't think is some elite offense. They do have a few good hitters, like Mookie Betts and JD Martinez are extremely good, but the rest of their lineup is kind of average. So I like Betts and Martinez as plugs, more so Mookie Betts, but I don't really have too much interest in a Red Sox stack. I think the Cubs versus Max Fried and the Braves versus John Lester are better picks. It's a better pitcher's park in Atlanta, and those 2 starters are just worse than Kevin Gausman. Lester actually is a curious case this year because his ERA is 2.66, but his FIP is 4.55 and his xFIP is 4.86. He's striking out about 7 per 9 and walking over 4 per 9. So just looking at his ERA, I don't think most people will be on Atlanta tonight, but Lester has just been awful this year. His velocity is down. He's walking more guys. There's stolen base potential against him because he can't make a pickoff move. And the Braves do steal a lot of bases. So I think there's a really, really high ceiling for the Braves for fantasy output tonight. And I don't really think too many people are going to be on them. So they could be just as contrarian as Oakland. And we have the salary pretty easily to pay up for them. I think more people will focus on the Cubs side of the game because of the pitching change, which kind of the news just makes it more obvious to use the Cubs. They originally had Mike Soroka pitching for Atlanta, but he got scratched. So the change in news is probably going to have a lot of people on the Cubs. But I think you can get the Braves at lower ownership. So I may actually even prefer them, even for expensive costs, because the pitchers are just not that expensive. So the 4 offenses for me tonight are the A's, the Braves, the Cubs, and the Rangers. I'd probably be on the Rangers more if not for their projected ownership. Like, I just think everyone is going to have them, especially Joey Gallo. He should easily be the highest owned hitter tonight against James Shields, lefty versus righty, a lot of power. James Shields gives up a lot of fly balls, but I mean, baseball's random enough that I'm okay just kind of being even with the field on Texas, maybe a little overweight. So having them in like 25, 30, 35% of lineups, which I think should be about what everyone else has. And then kind of just focusing also on the Cubs, Braves, and A's. I think Blue Jays for plugs makes them sense. Andrew Triggs I think he's a good strikeout pitcher, but he's also been homer prone. So I think you can target against him. The Blue Jays just have a good offense. So maybe they're the number 5 team. And then I'll throw in one more contrarian team. I just don't think Chad Kuhl is particularly good, and I think he could be pretty chalky tonight. So for a contrarian stack, I think the Padres actually make some sense. There's a bunch of sharp money that favors them, so that's one thing that's notable. They're really cheap, just like, well, most of the other offenses tonight. But I think it's just that Kuhl is going to be be someone that people use, and he's just bad. So as a contrarian team, the Padres, I think, are usable, but ownership should be pretty spread out tonight. Like the A's and Braves could be just as contrarian. There just should be more leverage on the Padres. So I think they are worth, I don't know, having like one stack of as like a number 6 team. But the focus here, I think, is fairly easy with Texas, Oakland, Chicago, and Atlanta, and then just mixing in Toronto and San Diego just a little bit. And then Red Sox is plugs too, but I don't really want to stack them either. And they actually are – Boston is expensive enough that you actually do have to make some sacrifices at pitcher to fit them in. It's the one offense that really costs enough where you have to use really cheap pitchers to make it work. So I don't like Boston either for that reason. This has been a pretty short one today. No weather concerns. All right. Anyone watching, let me know if you have questions, but I think that's pretty much it. I'll summarize the pitchers, just kind of try to figure out the exposure here. I'm thinking 60% or so of Velasquez, probably less actually, probably like 50% each of Velasquez, Gonzalez, and Skaggs. Those are my 3 favorite. And then maybe 30% Weaver, and then like 10% each of Archer and Samardzija. Something like that. I could be a little bit higher on Gonzalez, Skaggs, and Velasquez, though. I think maybe bump up those guys a little bit and kind of leave off Samardzija and Archer. I think those are the fringe plays, but I think the focus should definitely be on Gonzalez and Velasquez for value in the lineups where salary actually matters. And then I'm just kind of including Skaggs a bunch because there are going to be lineups where salary doesn't matter. Because I do still think Skaggs is the highest expected output pitcher tonight. But for ownership and for just pricing value and all of that, it could be worth not having him that much. But I still think you should be overweight to the field on him. All right. Anything else? I guess not. All right. That's going to do it. Good luck to everyone tonight. I think we'll be back for another one of these roughly same time tomorrow. So yeah, see you all then.